Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Naomi Takoyan Underwood, and I'm the Executive Director of the Asian American Journalists Association. Thanks so much for joining our webinar today as we present our Asian American Journalists Association Style Guide. This really has been a labor of love for over 2 years with over more than 5 dozen volunteers participating to bring you what we have today that can be found at aajastyleguide.org. I wanted to make sure that folks knew this is going to be a living resource. It's not going to be a static guide. We have developed a process that will make sure that volunteers and staff are working to incorporate the input and the feedback we get from the AAPI community and from the newsrooms who we engage. And this really is about also not only about equitable representation of AAPIs, but also holding newsrooms accountable to better journalism that's equitable, that's inclusive, and that is nuanced and considers the experiences of our communities. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce the folks on the call. First of all, our co-chairs who have led this process from day one, our VP of Civic Engagement, Marianne Liu, and her fellow co-chairs, Brian Cleveland, as well as Celia Wu, and our two very dedicated developers and engineers who have created the beautiful interface you see today, Audrey and Shelley. And last but not least, the representative from our Pacific Islander Task Force, who will tell us more about the specifics of being able to cover Pacific Islander communities equitably. And with that, I turn it over to Marianne.
Hi and welcome. Thank you all for spending the night with us. Really appreciate you all taking the time to learn how to cover our communities more comprehensively. So this guide is meant for anyone curious to learn more about AAPI Islander communities. So often our experiences flatten, but it's our hope to bring nuance and accuracy with this guide. Again, it is living and we are figuring it out as we go, but this could not have been done without the help of more than 50 volunteers, because the AAPI population is incredibly and culturally linguistically diverse, made up of over 50 ethnic groups that speak more than 100 languages. This guide has not been updated for more than a decade, and has changed even how we define ourselves. It's been a long process, over 2 years for recruiting folks, and we're always open for more help and continue recruiting across the pan-AAPI sphere. Looking at the old guide, we determined what terms were still important and update those terms. We added more terms and definitions with journalists, academics, and community workers. And then we have the full guide copy edited. Being that the AAPI community is so diverse, like I said, this is an ongoing learning process with a community that votes and vets and all the terms and language. And for example, our committee includes someone who is Pacific Islander, but also someone who is Ecuadorian of Chinese descent and another who is Indian Guyanese. We represent different generations, from veteran journalists, the New York Times, the Washington Post, AP, but also a college student and a high school student from different waves of immigration. Again, cannot stress more than enough, this could not have been done without the hours put forth by volunteers, working with more than 50. And wanted to show you all the folks that were involved real quick. And let's see. From people from Asians Advancing Justice, Stop Asian Hate, Angry Asian Man, as well as APIA Vote, on Hopkins University and Stanford University. All this is not have been done without the path carved out by longtime AAJA mentor and editor from the Los Angeles Times, Henry Furman, who distinguished that we do not use hyphen in Asian American. Those hyphens serve to divide even as they are meant to connect. Their use in racial and ethnic identities can connote an otherness, a sense that people of color are somehow not fully citizens or fully American. And I wanted to also stress that when possible, we created a very simple guide, takeaways, if you can fire up that presentation, that when possible, while covering our communities, we want to be sure to keep the following points in mind. Number one, be specific. Different generations, even within a community, may pronounce, order, and spell things differently. Number two, always ask what the source prefers, especially regarding spelling and order of their name. And wanted to take it away to Brian, who'll talk about how we determine which terms would get into the guide, our thresholds.
Thanks, Marion. So we had basically we spent a lot of time talking about what are the thresholds of style guides. I have worked on a number of style guides at a number of publications, and it can be infinitely large if you're not careful. Style books, and we wanted to really sort of focus on what would be the most helpful to the groups that we thought would use this guide, and really just sort of think about how we could keep the focus in something that also felt sort of useful for people. One of the things that when we were going through the old guide, we found a lot of entries that were essentially sort of like Wikipedia dumps, which at the time I think probably was helpful for folks. But now, when we had lists for like different countries, and it was just like a lot of like geographic and population stats and things that people could easily Google now. And so we didn't want it to be an encyclopedia. We wanted it to be more actionable and sort of useful for that. And so we set about these three thresholds are kind of what we decided on at the end. One, does it relate to the AAPI experience? We didn't want it to be something that was all Asians everywhere in the world. That is a very large scope that we felt was a little larger than we wanted to tackle. So to really keep it into the AAPI experience specifically. We also thought about, is there are some of these terms that are offensive and shouldn't be used, was definitely a threshold for putting an entry into the book, because we certainly, one of the things we wanted to provide guidance to groups on was basically things that they should be careful about using, whether that was stuff that they shouldn't use at all or just things that they should be aware of in context, like, hey, some people find this offensive, some people don't, but just understand the context if you're going to sort of like consider using this term. And then the third one is, does the term require clarification from AAJA? Again, in sort of the spirit of not wanting to be an encyclopedia, we wanted to really think about, like, is this something where we can essentially have added value by the guidance that we're giving to people? So we had considered certain terms like defining K-pop, but at the end, it didn't feel like that was a thing that really we could help provide more clarification on. If people wanted to know what K-pop was, if they didn't, they could look it up fairly easily and find that answer. And we just didn't think that there was anything we could require clarification on. So that helped us really focus things down, which was super helpful as we were trying to really revamp this pretty wholeheartedly from the start. And so for what we did from the methodology for all of this was really, again, sort of start at looking at the old entries that were there, kind of culling them down using these thresholds, and figuring out what we wanted to keep, what we didn't want to keep. Of what we wanted to keep, what we sort of wanted to rework a little bit, and try to make better, or if it needed to be, and then really surveying a whole swath of people. Is both Naomi and Marianne have mentioned, there were a ton of people involved with this effort. So surveying a lot of people to see what terms they wanted to see in here, and then again applying the thresholds to see should we include those or not. And that was sort of how we ended up with a lot of the terms that we were having here. But we also wanted to make sure that there was a broad representation of terms. So we have terms that are related to South Asians, East Asians, Pacific Islanders, a lot of different things that we wanted to make sure we were really brought catching the whole scope of all of the communities in AAJA, and then also really sort of trying to focus in on kind of priorities of what were things that we people felt very strongly we should get in there. There were some things that we definitely want to circle back on that were proposed, but frankly we just ran out of time, because in some cases they were really complicated issues that required some more kind of time than we had, because we had a very hard deadline of the conference when we unveiled this thing. And so we really needed to make sure that we could get it out on time, because even so we were making changes up the morning of the presentation to really make sure this was up to date. But as has already been mentioned, we also created a structure, which we're in the middle of doing our first update right now, where we can keep this as a living document. I can say from experience, one of the worst things that you can have for a style guide is to set it and forget it. That makes your style guide very outdated and fairly useless pretty quickly. And so we wanted to make sure that we built into this a setting, and this will get talked out more later on in the presentation, but that would help us make sure that we were continuing to update this process later on, tweak entries that already existed, add new entries. If at some point some entries feel like they are outdated and don't need to be in there, we can call those out later on. But we have a whole group of volunteers, we have a whole forum, this will get talked about later, where people can submit changes that they want to make into the style guide. And then we have a very large committee of people who are revisiting those suggestions, working on definitions, figuring out what should be in there, and then making sure that we can update it on a regular cadence too, so that we don't go as long as we did last time without any major updates into the style book. So that's kind of how that came apart. Like was already mentioned, after we sort of decided what was going to be in there, we had a bunch of experts weigh in with their feedback on the definitions. We put that through the process and incorporated that feedback. And then we had a bunch of copy editors go through, make sure everything was clean, consistent, clear, and also concise as possible. One of the things that you want to do when you're writing style entries is really to be concise as much as you can, because there's nothing worse than having an incredibly long entry to have to dig through to figure out the information that you actually want to find to the question that you have. And so, yeah, that's kind of how we came about it, and how we plan to move forward with keeping it updated. Anita, I'm going to throw to you if you want to talk about Pacific Islander terminology.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to set my timer for 4 minutes because there's so much to talk about. It's easy to, blow through that. All right, everybody. Hafa My name is Anita Hofschneider, and I'm a Chamorro journalist representing the AAJA Pacific Islander Task Force. We were created to help AAJA fulfill its mission to support both Asian American and Pacific Islander journalists. So this year, as part of the Style Guide revamp, we held a Zoom event with Pacific Islander journalists and community members and circulated a survey about how the news media treats our communities. We drew up some guidance that Felicia will drop in the chat now. We're working on incorporating this into the Style Guide's landing page, but for now, we'll just share the link. One main message that Marianne mentioned and we want to emphasize is that always ask your sources how they prefer to identify and defer to their self-identification. Many Pacific Islanders identify as Indigenous, and your work will be better if you make an effort to learn about and understand their unique cultures and histories. Another key takeaway is to treat the AAPI acronym with extreme caution. Only use it if the story you're writing or the data set you're analyzing or the event you're hosting includes both Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Otherwise, it's okay to just focus on Asian Americans. A lot of people think that the term AAPI should actually be discontinued because it often leads to conflating the two communities or easily erasing Pacific Islanders. But we know that AAPI is frequently used by researchers and by government agencies. So we asked ourselves, what should a journalist do? One way to ensure accuracy is to be aware that just because something is true for Asian Americans doesn't mean it'll be true for Pacific Islanders. If you're covering a research paper about AAPIs, ask the authors whether their dataset actually includes Pacific Islanders, and if the findings remain true for both groups once they are disaggregated. The same holds true for the NHPI acronym, which stands for Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. Not being aware of this can and does lead to inaccurate news articles, and I'm happy to talk about those examples during the Q&A if anybody wants to hear more. Another tip is to be aware that for more than 25 years, federal data collection guidelines have recommended separating Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders from other communities, including Asian Americans. As we have seen throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, this doesn't often happen. As journalists, we have the opportunity to hold government agencies accountable for this lack of data disaggregation, which is sometimes due to small sample sizes, but may also just be due to ignorance. I also want to add that in this iteration of the Style Guide, we collaborated with the Ahahui Haku Mo'olelo Hawaiian Journalists Association, as well as AAJA volunteer Jessica Hilo to add several important Native Hawaiian specific terms to the Style Guide. One important point that's worth underscoring is that a common misconception is that Hawaiian is a term for the residents of Hawaii, kind of like Californian refers to people who live in California, but that's not true. Hawaiian refers to Native Hawaiians, the indigenous people of the island chain. This is not new, but this is something that has been in the style book for years and still manages to be a frequent mistake we see in national media, so it's worth repeating. The Hawaiian Journalists Association has great guidance about covering Hawaiians as well, so they're a wonderful resource I wanted to mention. And finally, what we hope is that this style guide will help journalists understand the importance of listening to both Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, identifying them how they prefer to be identified, and to think twice before using the acronym AAPI. If you have any questions about the Pacific Islander related terms in this guide, feel free to email us. Our email is in that Google Doc link that was dropped in the chat. And thank you very much. I just made it under 4 minutes. So great. And because I'm nervous, I don't remember who's next. Anybody remember?
Audrey?
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anita. I'll talk really briefly about the site design. So obviously this is a new site for AAJA, and it exists within this universe of AAJA sites that already exist. The primary site for the organization, then there's this studio site where you can find mentors, a great service that the organization provides. And now this would be the third site. So we really wanted to keep it within the universe of AAJA. We used the style guide, the fonts, the colors that they recommended, and we kind of wanted to give it its own identity. So a lot of, you'll see like the rounded corners, you'll see something that looks a little bit more like app design, maybe like a more modern application. And that was to really focus on the UX of the piece. So we really wanted this to be clear and easy for folks to use. So we focused primarily on navigation of the style guide portion of the site. So you'll see in the style guide when we go through the full site, there's a few heuristics that you can navigate through. So you can search through categories, which are, the team worked really hard to come up with these categories that the terms would fit under. So you can filter for those. Then there's also the search functionality, which is a way that a lot of folks find information now. So we wanted to offer that for everyone to be able to search in the way that's most comfortable. And then you'll also see related terms. So if there's something that is related to the content, you will see it coming up whenever you're looking for a specific term. So we hope that gives people a lot of ways to navigate the site in the way that makes most sense to them. And we really wanted to have an emphasis on sharing the terms and adding to the guide to remind everyone that this is a living resource and will continue to be updated. So you'll see that little how to contribute box always stuck to the side of the style guide. And if you ever search for something and it's not in the style guide, a link will come up that allows you to submit something to a Google form to add to the guide. So I will hand it off to Shelley to give us a site walkthrough.
Hi, can everyone see my screen? Okay, cool. So I will start with this is hi, I'm Shelly. I'm the developer for the AAJA Style Guide website. And this is where you see if you go to AAJA, AAJastyleguide.org, and this is where the latest version we release on. So this is the homepage. On the homepage, we have about 3 terms which we've featured. This could be changed, depends on the events. And if any thing happened, we can swap out the terms on the front page. So essentially the front page is a quick introduction about the style guide and some feature terms, and also the dedications for the style guide. So if we go to if we click the button to how to use the style guide, this will link to the page to the guidance and resources page where we have the detailed instructions on the features we have as highlighted by Audrey. So we have the search box, we have the filters, and we have some quick an image here to tell all the features we have regarding the terms, the description, and then for the related terms we have those links, and also we have terms and categories. So if we click on to go to style guide, which is the main thing, the main style guide, where the main style guide content located, which can also be accessible if we click via the style guide, like on the nav bar. So this is where all the terms of the latest version will live. So we have like different categories could be filtered if you click identity. Then we're showing like all the terms related to identities, and we can uncheck it. Or we can show history, and all those filters are also multi-selection. So you could shows like both do not use category and also the histories categories. Then we will show like all the terms like belongs to those two terms together. And as for like, we also have the features to order the terms. Like this is currently ordered alphabetically from A to Z, but if we can switch to Z to A, and then this is like reverse order. And then one of the search function, I will do a quick demonstration. So if we want to search like a particular term, like maybe like tiger mom, so we will like just type tiger mom, and then everything, all the terms start with tiger will be show up here. And then if we want to search, for example, like a term like tiger dad, we don't have these terms. So we'll see like the no result page. And then when you see the no result page, the site will actually prompt like a Google form where you could suggest it like new entries. So if you think it's an entrance we should have in the style guide, feel free to click the link, and this will give you an opportunity to add the terms, and then the committee will review the terms and trying to decide if it's a good fit. We will actually see the new terms in the next release of session. This form is also accessible by clicking suggest a new term here. So under the how to contribute button, so you could click this link, and which will lead to exactly the same Google Forms for you to give us any suggestions for like new terms. And so we click the search box. So this goes back to all the terms we have. And yeah, so then we have like a the third section of the page is actually called guidance and resources. So in this page, we talks about the history and approach, how this terms came to like how this guide, the history of the guide and everything. And like some standards, Brian and Miriam talks about like what we decided which terms goes into here. And we also have like, this is also the form lead to the volunteer form. So if you're interested in helping out and want to help maintain the AAJA style guide, feel free to click the volunteer with AAJA style guide link, committee link. So this link will prompt a form where you can sign up to be a volunteer and your availabilities and etc. So the second section, which I've mentioned previously under guidance and resources, is actually this like a simple like a chart to illustrate how we actually use like the style guide and what is information is contained for each like a style guide box. So it has like the title, description, external link. Oh, speaking of external link, which I forgot to demo earlier. So for the related terms under the term, so for example, we see this like AAPI terms, we can also like all those related, the related link is like, those links are all clickable. So if we go to like click Hawaiian, it will actually link to the terms Hawaiian. And we can also click back to like Pacific Islander. It will actually lead to Pacific Islander. Another cool thing about this style guide is actually if you look at this a particular term, for example, I want to share this term like South Asia. So you can hover this like a link button here. So if you click, it will actually copy a link of this particular card. So you could just share this link directly to your friends. For example, now it's like it has been copied. So if I click this and enter this to like a term to like a browser, it will actually goes to this term directly. So this is like a very convenient ways for people to like for everyone to share the terms to your friends or to other people you think this might be a useful resources. So the third section under the guidance and resources page is actually like what some other related resources we think might be relevant. So here contains like the style guide from other like diversity journalism association and also from higher education and some other news agency, what they think is best practice for covering like either minority or covering Asian American and then covering like all the different sensitive topics, etc. So we recommended you to go through like those links as well, which could be like read together with our style guide, etc. And then the last section on each page is actually the donate button. So this guide is produced with all the volunteers hours in the support of donors who keeps AAJA running. So if you're interested in donate to us, definitely click this link, and this will lead you to the page where you can make any contributions to us, and we are all greatly appreciate it. And then the last page of the section is actually the about page. So the about page is like where we have like the bios of all the co-leads who started this project. We have like the production team, which is Audrey and I, and also we have like the AAJA headquarter project management who helps run this project. And then we have like the community member and also all the people who have offered support in the past 2 years during this project. And yeah, and then lastly, but not the least, is like this guide we were dedicated to the memory of the Henry, who is a longtime AAJA member and a mentor. So that's all from me. Yeah. I think next will be Celia, who will talks about like the partnership or
how to grow the good style guide. Yep. So if we could get the slides back up. Thank you. Hi, everyone. If you could just get the slides. So one of the things that I'm going to be talking about, the guide is only going to be as useful as the way people use it. So we definitely want people to use the guide. And, one of the things that Naomi mentioned when we first started this webinar was how we hold newsrooms accountable, right? So I wanted to share this article to start my part of the presentation because I thought it was really interesting. Because yes, we do have a question, we created the guide to hold newsrooms accountable, to hold communicators accountable, but how do we hold in this new media world, how do we hold AI accountable? So this was an article that I noticed, I think it came out a week ago from AAJA News, written by Thomas Lee. And if you could I'm just gonna read to you, if you could go to the next slide, what he discovered. I was working on a story for the Boston Globe about 1587, an Asian American sneaker company whose brand is synonymous with cultural pride. I ran a spelling and grammar check. Google flagged 2 instances where I wrote the word message. At first, I thought I misspelled the word, but I didn't. I then noticed Google in both cases suggested the correct spelling was massage. In each case, I wrote message after the phrase unapologetically Asian, which happens to be the company's motto. Google's algorithms apparently detected the word Asian and assumed that the word that should follow naturally was massage. Obviously, this in the massage parlors, that is where the incorrect grammar fix really showed what a long way we have to go to hold not only newsrooms accountable, but also technology companies, right? So I just wanted to share that with people. And if we can just go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So here I have put down 6 ways in which we can actually grow the style guide. And again, we measure the growth and the value of the style guide on the people who use it. It's not going to be worth anything unless people use it, right? So, and that is where we are asking all of you in the audience as partners, in this journey to help grow the style guide usage. So there's direct access. People can come directly to it. You can put underneath your signature, for instance, hey, check out the AAJA style guide, right? As under signatures, that's for direct access. There's search. So there's so much that we can actually do in terms of search. So say if I type in Tiger Mom, I would love to see a reference to AAJA style guide come up as a result in search. And then we have promotion. And this was a campaign that AAJA HQ managed to promote the style guide on Instagram. But again, these are, you know, 3 ways that we can help grow usage of the style guide. And if you go to the next slide, please. Other ways in terms of newsroom workflow. If you work in a newsroom, can you, you know, get your newsroom to reference this style guide and also many of the other style guides that need to be referenced in order to write equitably about our communities. We also have partner platforms. So this was actually an effort by Tracy Powell at the Pivot Fund, where with ChatGPT, they created a style guide for covering communities of color, right? And so this is directly integrated into ChatGPT. You can download this, and there will be an instance where you can use ChatGPT for style guide for community covering communities of color. So that's a great example of a potential partnership with in terms of using technology platforms as partners. And then there's new products. So one of the things that I did as a Reynolds Journalism Institute fellow was I created the only Chrome extension of a newsroom style guide. And so why can't, you know, if we have some people out there that are, you know, I wrote a toolkit on how to build a style guide, a Chrome extension. So I'd love to see an effort of building a Chrome extension of the AAJA style guide. So these are all the ways that we can do in terms of partner platforms and cooperation with partner platforms to search, and also through new products. But really the important thing is to always bear in mind, we are only as good as people coming to it, right? Not only contributing to it in terms of amendments to entries and new entries that belong here, but also what we can do to encourage users to use it, newsrooms, and also it's really about holding people accountable. So I think our next step is to really, how are we going to hold AI accountable to this, right? And big technology companies, because you see, and that's why I wanted to give that example of from ASAM News. So thank you so much.
So again, wanted to thank everybody for coming on. There were some questions. First off, just invite everybody to put any questions on. I know that some people had sent in questions, so we'll try to address those and as many as we can. Things in the future that we are looking at and we're figuring out how it might work, kind of like what Celia was saying, figuring out how to integrate it, whether it is Slack, whether it's ChatGPT. Another thing that would be amazing to figure out is how to integrate audio, because a lot of the terms might be in different languages and you want to know the right way to pronounce things. The other one is there's one visual term in there. For example, you're not supposed to stick chopsticks straight up into rice. It'd be nice to see how, you know, that might look. So we don't just have to explain it. So we're working on all these different iterations as we go on. Our first one was just we wanted to launch during the convention, so have the biggest splash, and then we keep changing. So one of the questions that came out on chat was, what efforts exist to correct incorrect news reports that are not in line with the style guide? For example, we had addressed this one, the New York Post. I don't know if you all saw, but when news of the assassination attempt on Trump came out, they incorrectly reported that the shooter was Chinese, to all of our horror, not founded on anything. And then when they corrected it, they didn't issue a correction. They just quietly changed it, which was not okay. So in this instance, we're figuring this out, but we will later have an extension of, so the committee will meet every quarter to decide which terms, but there will be an extension of the committee that will meet when, or just talk on Slack when current events happen like this and figure out how to handle it. And if we need to release a news release and be like, this is not okay. And in that case, we did release a news release. So several members, we talked through it on what made sense and we put out a release. So in cases like that, we will do. And obviously looking for volunteers, that kind of work takes more time, but it is exact kind of work why many of us became journalists and why it's so important.
Yeah,
And Marian, if I could just,
I just also wanted to add, Marian is the VP of Civic Engagement. And in addition to this style guide committee, we do have a rapid response committee staffed by both HQ staff as well as super volunteers called Media Watch. That is sort of the first point of contact. If there is something that needs to be corrected or if there's this discussion that needs to happen, Media Watch is our first line of communication with the newsrooms who have committed the error. One thing that I want to point out too, if you want to look up the word kamikaze, which is our most recent example, we activated Media Watch around responding to that. And we're not here to catch newsrooms in aha moments either. If you notice, if something has happened in the news and you do not necessarily hear from AAJA publicly, we are trying to work privately with the newsroom to ensure that they're working amongst their processes to correct their style, right? So would highly encourage you to look at Media Watch and see if you want to get involved there, as well as Style Guide. And the work that Media Watch does, as Marianne said, because she's so deep in both processes, feeds into how Style Guide processes inputs and what's going on in real time with news. Sorry, go ahead, Celia. My apologies.
Oh, actually, I forgot what I was going to say. So.
Appreciate it, Celia. I love those slides. Another question just came up. How frequently do you plan to update the guide? Our committee plans to meet every quarter. We are all volunteers. Yeah, I'm doing this on our free times, balancing all the craziness of life and deadlines and work. I mean, on this panel, like, we represent many different newsrooms, and we will do it every quarter. So we'll meet every 3 or 4 months or so, and we do it through a vote, and we talk through it, and we kind of also check in the same thing as we did with the updated guide. We'll check in with experts, academics who study these terms for a living, and do what makes sense. Also, we also know that terms change, and also different generations see terms change. For example, one that we were talking about how to even deal with is the term mixed. An older generation might find that okay, younger generations might not. We're talking about if this should be a do not use term or a use with caution term. So we just changed it to a use with caution. We try not to, unlike the AP style guide and saying, do this or don't do this, we try to give you background on how different, communities might use different terms, and how, what they're saying. We don't say you have to do this kind of thing. We want to give you the entire context. Another question that I saw that came in before was, any advice on how you adapt the style guide to media based in Asia? Really appreciate that question. Of course, all of us here are American based. That's very hard, like Brian said, for us to figure that all out in the first go. But AAJA did this incredible guide on gender-based terms, which we included in our list of resources, and plan to follow up and to incorporate what makes sense. Also talk with them in the future on what makes sense for the larger diaspora. So really appreciate that question. Another one was, how can folks who might be interested or curious on working on the guide be involved? Shelly put the link in the chat. So, and it's also all over the Style Guide website itself. So very easy to come and join us. We also have a email that reaches a lot of us, AJ Style Guide at Gmail. Style Guide. You just put it in the chat.
Style Guide at AAJA. Yeah.
Yes, which reaches the co-leads and national. Another question, what are some of the largest and impactful changes in language that the team wrestled with? I think the hardest thing that we had, and that's why we set the thresholds, was we did not want this to be an encyclopedia or dictionary of all things Asian. Because if you represent, for example, if you put in even Indian dance terms, then you have to put in South Korean, Chinese, etc., because we want to be very fair and inclusive. So we set the terms like, what do we as journalists provide context to the issue? And what do we as AAPI journalists? And also, is this term offensive? We've also added quite a bit of historical terms, because those are actually hard to find on Google. We wanted to, if you can find on Google, then Google it, like say K-pop. We are not adding any extra guidance on that. But if it's hard to find, who knew? The reason why we have birthright citizenship in this country was due to a Chinese American man. And that is in the guide. And that's not always easy to find. So there are historical terms, and we're considering more historical terms. And again, if there are terms that you think that should be in the guide, please let us know. I saw Brian got off mic.
Leah raised her hand first. I'll let her go.
Well, actually, I was going to ask you to speak about it, but I think as an example of one of the terms that we grappled with and changed, right, in real time. And I use this as an illustration of how real time open we were, in terms of was this thing around internment camps. So Brian, I was going to ask you to speak to that.
Yeah, so that was something that, the terminology of that has changed over the years, right? Internment camp was what was used for a long time. That was part of AB style. And obviously now that's not the preference, imprisonment or various things. But we created this entry to what sort of Celia is talking about. And we had gotten feedback from a few different groups that, we wanted to incorporate into the entry too. And so in the upcoming update that we're working in the middle of, we have some language that is going to sort of tweak that to sort of better make the case, not just for not calling it an internment camp, but using incarceration and words like that, but also how groups feel about the term concentration camp, because that was something that some groups felt very strongly about, that's the sort of correct terminology that should be used, and sort of how to address that. And so that's something that, we got that feedback from the National Convention meeting, and that's one of the things that we're working on and incorporating it in there in a way that sort of helps people understand sort of we tip to it a little bit in the entry that you can see on the screen right now, but sort of fleshing that out a little bit and also linking to some documentation in that sort of underscores sort of why that is. The thing that I was going to say after Marion was talking was sort of I do think history terms were sort of one of the things we wrestled with a lot, because there is no shortage of historical moments in people that we can put into this style guide. So the question was really sort of how do we, especially at the beginning when we again had a hard deadline that we had to meet and we had to make the workload manageable, sort of how do we decide sort of what we mention and what we don't mention, so that we're not just sort of reciting things that people don't know. And really the thing that we sort of tried to focus on was what sort of had ripple effects to people today, or just really broad implications that may not be obvious to everybody. I think there are some historical moments that everybody sort of understands what the implications of them were, but things that aren't necessarily as obvious, can we provide that extra context for people to really help them understand why this thing mattered, why it was momentous, and why people today, if it was something that happened many decades ago, why it matters to people today, and so trying to kind of get that across to people. And that is one of the areas where there's definitely more work to be done, and I think more things that we definitely want to add in there, but just trying to really kind of think through what we can help explain to people in a way that, like Marion said, is not going to be obvious if you just Google a person's name or an event or something like that. What can we really provide that extra context for?
There was another question that popped up in chat. How are we getting this into the hands of students and early career journalists? Well, I hope some of you all turned in tonight. Otherwise, we are open to doing more workshops. We've done it for one newsroom already, and then we've already are planning other ones. We're talking to different organizations. Totally invite people to, if you think that you're part of a university newsroom, etc., that would be interested in having such a workshop, happy to come in and to figure out what makes sense in terms of a workshop for you all. And also we are recording this and we'll send it out. Celia, you had some things to add to that?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I love that this question was raised. Really, one of the things that when we think about partnerships, we actually really should include universities as well. language equity, especially in this time where DEI programs are being dismantled, I think that we have to really work through the classrooms and through the students and faculty that language equity really matters. And there are workshops that we can conduct around language equity, not just just presenting a webinar on this it is, but building up how we arrive to this position of creating why words matter so much. And so I think that universities is a great idea in terms of partnerships. And again, not only should we hold newsrooms accountable, we should hold universities accountable in terms of how they speak about the AAPI community. And with that, because I referenced that, if people did not hear about the outrage that was caused by the chancellor of Purdue University during graduation, you look it up and you'll see lots of work needs to be done at the universities too. So
I'll say one of the things we were really happy about at the national convention where we had a lot of folks from AAJA Voices who attended the session where we unveiled this, who were very excited to take it back to their college, newspapers and everything like that. So I think that's something we can also continue to build on too.
And they count. And one is now in our committee. So I really appreciate that. We have a high school in the committee. So just really want to stress, don't see any more questions yet, but really want to stress that this is a learning, evolving guide. We are as good as our volunteers, so really encourage everybody to come. Again, we're just volunteers, we're learning as we go, and we're changing it as we go because definitions, terms, communities all evolve as we go. So really appreciate everybody who put so much love, passion, and heart into this guide. And please ask us if you have questions or want to join. Again, it's styleguide@aaja.org, and it's AAJstyleguide.org. So thank you all. And Naomi, if you have anything to say, but thank you.
No, just thank you everyone for making the time tonight. Again, this committee and the leadership are very committed and they're available to amplify this work and to continue to refine it to make our newsrooms accountable to our communities. So thank you to everyone joining us, and thank you to all the leaders on this call who have worked to make this what it is right now.